It's been an eventful year for many aspects of agriculture, including the farmland market. Dennis Reyman with the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers joins us now with his outlook for the year ahead. Thank you for joining us, Dennis. So how are things looking as farmers begin preparing for 2026?
Well, hi, hello, Tammy, and belated Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you. Yeah, as we finish out 2025 and look forward into 2026, what we saw through harvest in this area, and we're smack in the middle of Northwest Iowa. As you go to the west of our office, the land is lush soils. It's rolling, gently rolling for the most part, and pretty well drained, naturally well drained. It doesn't need a lot of additional drainage tile or things like that. And so it handles water well, and it holds water well. And we saw very good yields. We saw very good to record yields on most of that ground and on both corn and soybeans. Now, as you go east of Storm Lake, you get into the glacial till soil, and that's a younger soil association. It covers northwest or north central Iowa all the way down to Des Moines, and it's a little more of a flatter and more pockmarked. It's a more of a prairie pothole type of area. So drainage is more of an issue, and it's generally a little heavier soil type. So what we saw there was good yields on both corn and beans, but fewer record yields and fewer of what we'd call great. So good, great record yields is kind of what we saw across the board. That does influence the land market, as you might anticipate.
And let's talk about that. Yeah, what affected land sales throughout 2025?
Yeah, land sales. You've heard many of us on here talk about land selling season, which occurs generally later half of the year, October, November, and into early December. So we're at the conclusion of that stretch. We saw a good number of sales, a good number of volume, but not record volume. In fact, in the last 5 years, it's really the number 4 year in terms of volume in this part of the state. And so we saw pretty good sales and actually some very good sales on some of the best land. And that's where the differentiation is when you get into the lesser quality land, maybe that doesn't sell as well. And that's been reported from other parts of the country as well. So some discrimination against some of the lower quality which is higher risk, and people not willing to extend to accept that higher risk on a purchase. They may lease it, but that's short term. A purchase, you're going to live with that, and maybe a little less attractive. So the Iowa State Survey came out earlier this month, and that was interesting to the extent that the north central Iowa that I just talked about was actually down over the last year by about 3% on average. But as you get into the western side of Iowa, it was up by 2 to 3%. And also northeastern, extreme northeast Iowa was up 3 to 4%. What you find in those areas is a lot more cattle feeding, and especially in northeast Iowa, you see a lot more cow-calf. So we all know how that sector is performing, and that's translated into those local land markets as well.
Oh, I bet it has. Well, let's talk about any advice for landowners going into 2026.
Well, despite the land market, which the overall survey came out about steady, is actually up 0.7% across the state as an average, and that's an opinion survey. It's not actual. It's not a compilation of sales. But there's a wide disparity in financial comfort, I guess, and so there are a lot of farmers that don't have that land paid for. They don't own much, and they're renting most of it. And if you're a landowner and you're renting that land, and they tell you that margins are tight, that is true. They are tight. And if they had a record yield or if they had a near record yield, they're going to be okay, but not okay to the extent that they probably want to pay more rent. They're going to be okay that they can can pay you next year in good shape. But if it was, say, a good yield, but not a great or a record yield, that's where the real struggle is there. The costs went up several years ago. Production costs went up when we had $7 corn, and we had quite a bit of inflation, and those production costs have not settled back. Usually they will with time. That hasn't occurred yet.
No, definitely hasn't. Yeah, that is something to keep an eye on. That's Dennis Reyman with the American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. Thank you for your time and Happy New Year.